there's never been a better opportunity for people to distinguish themselves by simply doing the hard thing, the dirty thing, the different thing.
You can sing and speak?
The fact that we're guaranteed a chance to be ridiculous, to fail, to dream, what more could you possibly want?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, one more time today, give a huge round of applause for our next featured speaker, Mike Rowe!
Oh, holy crap, man. It's all right.
Man, thank you. You could be anywhere in the world. Thank you for your time today, sir. I appreciate that.
I've been in a lot of green rooms. That's a good one.
Thank you, sir. We try to take care of our people.
They got chicken back there. They got beef. They got coffee. They got an open bar. They got an IV drip set up. I mean, dude, it's top shelf.
We want to make people like you happy. You know, you won't want to come back if it wasn't good back there.
Fair enough.
So, you've become the face of Blue Collar America. You know, was that ever part of your plan?
No. There was no. Well, no, it's funny. There was a plan, and then there wasn't, and then there was a new plan, and then there wasn't, right? And you play the cards you get, and I'd been working in TV for maybe 15 years. I was really impersonating a host, you know. I worked for a lot of different cable networks. I think I worked for most of them, you know, and I wound up in San Francisco in 2001. I was hosting a show called Evening Magazine. Terrible little show, came on after the news, right? And I would go to like wineries and museums and just kind of impersonate a host. And one night I came back, I'm sitting in my cubicle and my mother called me. I swear this is an answer to your question. She calls me and she says, "Michael, your grandfather turned 90 years old yesterday, and I was just thinking," and by the way, you know my granddad. Some of you would anyway, not by name. His name was Carl Noble, and he only went to the 7th grade, but my pop could take your watch apart, blindfolded, and put it back together.
Wow.
He built the house I was born in without a blueprint. By the time he was 30, he was a master electrician, steam fitter, pipe fitter, welder, architect, all self-taught. Anyhow, this guy was my hero growing up. And my mother calls me, right? I'm 41 years old. I'm hosting this show in San Francisco, which is a pretty cushy gig. And she says, "Michael, your grandfather turned 90 years old. He's not going to be around forever." And I was just thinking, wouldn't it be great, her exact words, "Wouldn't it be great," she said, "if before he died, he could turn on the television and see you doing something that looked like work?" And so, right, A, it's my mom, and B, it's my pop we're talking about. And so in that moment, I'm like, you know, she's right. So I asked my boss, why does Evening Magazine always have to be hosted from a winery or a museum or a theater? Why can't it be hosted from a factory floor or a construction site or a sewer? So long story short, the next morning I go in to a sewer line in downtown San Francisco, in the Tenderloin with my cameraman. And I spent—
You mean the streets?
Right in the streets. I mean, literally, at the intersection of Ellis and Jones.
It's got to be a rough sewer.
Dude, what happened in that sewer is actually half of a book I wrote a couple years ago, because it's really indescribable. But when I came out, I had been literally baptized, like in a river of crap. And I had so many realizations down there, one of which was I was a better guest than I was a host. So I came up with this footage, right? And I cut it into Evening Magazine. I was fired a couple days later. Because the show comes on at 7 o'clock at night, right? And people in the Bay Area, they're sitting down to watch a heart-tugging story about a three-legged dog in Marin overcoming canine kidney failure, and they see me crawling through a river of shit, right? It wasn't expected. But
Did they call you in the office and said, Mike, you're in some deep shit. We need to talk about this.
they didn't know what to
It's a missed
do.
opportunity.
They didn't know what to do because the letters that came in, some people were offended and put off and just horrified by the sight of it. But a lot of people were like, hey man, you think that's dirty? You should see what my dad does, my brother, my cousin, my uncle, my sister, my mom. Wait till you see what they do. And I was like, you know something? I'd never had feedback like that before in my business. So they fired me, but I took the footage and I started to shop it around. The Discovery Channel bought it. We called it Dirty Jobs. That was 2002. It went on the air. It's still on the air to this day, right? We've been on the air for 20 years. And, 4 or 5 years into it, when the show really blew up, I started this foundation called Mike Rowe, and then I went to Congress a few times, and then I partnered with some big companies. And we've been working on closing the country's skills gap by celebrating the kind of jobs that made my grandfather the man he was. So the show that I Forrest Gumped my way into happened because my mom told me to do something that looked like work, and I took her advice, and the next thing you know, I'm sitting here in Frisco, Texas, with you beautiful people, eating chicken, sipping Jack Daniels, and about to get an IV when we're done talking. So life is good. That answer your question?
Yes, sir. That was a great answer. You mentioned in that story, though, life sends you a bunch of ups and downs, and you went through a lot of things before you wound up here. How do you navigate through I can only imagine being in Hollywood as long as you have the highs and the lows that you've got to go through. Maybe what are some of the ways that you've navigated through some of those rocky roads?
Well, look, it's always a balance, right? We're all here, I think, because we believe that there's some sort of playbook for life, and there's some advice that we can take, and maybe some advice that we shouldn't take, right? Advice is tricky, because you never really know who's listening, and sometimes people need to hear this, and sometimes they need to hear that. A lot of different people could have called me and told me about my granddad on that day. A lot of different people could have said, why don't you do something on TV that looks like work? But I had to hear it from my mom. I had to hear it from a trusted source, right? So I don't know if you guys view me as a trusted source, so I'm stingy with my advice, but I'll tell you, for me, as soon as I did okay in Hollywood, impersonating a host and following the structure and taking the conventional route, right? I never had agents, I never had managers, I didn't do that, but I navigated and I did okay for about 12 or 15 years. I didn't have any actual success until I took what I guess you could call a reverse commute. I left Hollywood, I left New York, I went to a place, I grew up in Baltimore, which is none of those things, and look at you, I knew there was somebody, there's always one. But I stayed in Baltimore a while working in local TV, and then I wound up singing in the opera, which is super weird, right? But I was just trying to find a token.
You can sing and speak?
Vecchia si marra senti, il resto al pianto, scendere sacri montio devi, le me grazia ricevi. Yeah, so the thing is, ma'am.
Yes, you can.
My pop, who really truly was and still is heroic to me, gave me better advice than I can give you guys. When I realized, right, that I wasn't going to follow in his footsteps, I was probably 15 years old. And this is important. It's important to me anyway, because I was certain. I had real certainty in my 15-year-old brain that I was going to be able to build a house without a blueprint. I was going to be able to take Ryan's watch apart, blindfolded, and put it back together. I was going to be an electrician. I was going to be all those things. I hadn't lived long enough to realize that the handy gene is recessive, right? I hadn't lived long enough to realize just because I love something doesn't mean I can't suck at it. And And I hadn't lived long enough to realize just because I'm good at something doesn't necessarily mean I'm gonna love it, right? These are tricky lessons, you know, but it was my pop who said, hey, Mike, you can be a tradesman if that's really what you want to be. Just get a different toolbox. And that was one of those first moments looking back in my life where I realized a trusted source had spoken the truth. And so I abandoned my hope of following in his footsteps, finished high school, went to a community college, and I learned how to sing, and then I took some acting classes, and then I learned how to write. I wasn't interested in any of these things, honestly. They weren't passions of mine. They were just things that I thought maybe I could do. So I learned the shortest aria I could find, which you just heard a piece of, La Boheme, Puccini. I crashed an audition for the Baltimore Opera. I got in. I worked there for 7 years. I did some other local theater. Then I crashed another audition for the QVC cable shopping channel in 1990.
I bet you were a closer on there, though, right?
Dude, I was a hot mess. I was a nightmare. I'll tell you, quick sidebar. We were in the middle of a production at the Lyric Opera House. It was a Sunday afternoon, just like this, and it was called Der Ring des Nibelungen, this Wagnerian opera, and I'm just in the chorus. I'm just a guy holding a spear dressed as a Viking, and I don't need to be on stage. There's an intermission, and then like an hour where I don't have to be on stage. So I walk across the street to watch the football game, dressed as a Viking, okay? And I walk into the bar, the Mount Royal Tavern, and I sit down. I order a beer, and the bartender, a buddy of mine, he's got the TV on, but the football game's not on. He's watching a big guy in a shiny suit sell pots and pans. I'm like, Rick, what the hell is this? He goes, I'm auditioning for that guy's job tomorrow. So I sit there, drinking a Dos Equis, arguing with the bartender about the end of Western civilization, right? And I'm like, I can't get over this. This is an endless commercial that's on the TV, and I'm watching it. So he bets me $100 that I can't get hired. I tell him I can do that job. The next morning, we go to downtown Marriott. I talk about a pencil for 8 minutes. That was the audition for QVC. If you can talk about a pencil for 8 minutes, they give you a 3-month contract, and you go on the air. Like 3 nights later, I'm live on the air in Westchester, Pennsylvania, talking about the health team infrared pain reliever and the Amcor negative ion generator and eel skin wallets and plus size fashions. I'm talking about collectible dolls and coins and swords and all of it, man. So I just mentioned this because you asked me if I had a plan. Dude, there's no plan. Do what your mother says, sing in the opera, work for QVC for 3 years, answer the phone, crawl through a sewer, right? And so put your toolbox together. I wasn't sure what the tools in it were gonna be, and I'm still not sure. I'm older than I've ever been, and I just learned about this whole IV thing. You know, I'm gonna get a new tool in my box as soon as we're done here. So it's a process, man, and you're never, ever, ever done.
Amen, amen. You know, I saw a video on YouTube the other day, and it was a guy with his son, and the guy was wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase, and he was walking through the mall with his son, and the guy looks over at his son, who's 14 or 15 years old, and he says, and he's a guy in the corner working on the electrical box, and he says, if you don't get your act together, you're gonna end up like that guy over there. And the guy goes, dude, I made $300,000 last year, F you, right? But a lot of people think that way, you know, and when you travel around the country these days, and you just mentioned this earlier, a lot of people aren't stepping into the trades, the dirty jobs. Do you find yourself with like a newfound respect and empathy for those people that are still willing to do the hard stuff like your grandpa and the guys that you've encountered?
Well, I certainly have it, but I lost it for a while. And, you know, it's a really great question because to me, one of the biggest problems in our country right now are the the stigmas and the stereotypes and the myths and the misperceptions that keep people from pursuing a career in the trades. Yes. You know, I'm sure you guys have heard we're $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. We've got 9.5 million open positions today, most of which don't require a 4-year degree. We took shop class out of high school. We got 7.5 million able-bodied men sitting home, not even looking for work. And we're still lending money we don't have to kids who are never going to be able to pay it back to train them for a bunch of jobs that don't exist anymore, right? So this is crazy. This is crazy what we're doing. It's crazy how narrowly we've defined what a good job is. So again, I didn't sign up to be answering questions like this. This was never part of the plan. Well, that video you saw on YouTube, I experienced in the second season of Dirty Jobs. So this would have been 2005. Dirty Jobs is the #1 show on cable. I feel really great about myself. I've been living on the road for 18 months, and I'd live on the road for another 9 years after that. I didn't know it yet, but I was in it now. And I was so proud because my pop did see the first episode.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right?
That's awesome.
And the show did trigger many thousands of very kind letters from people who had men and women in their family like my pop who saw themselves in it. So I was feeling really good about not just the success of the show, but the reason I was doing it. You know how you feel like all the boxes start to check and you're firing on all cylinders and you're doing a good thing, right? So I'm in Newark and I get off a plane and I'm walking through the airport and I see a guy on a ladder. I see half of him. His top half is up in the ceiling somewhere doing something, right? And he comes down off the ladder, he sees me, he goes, "Mike Rowe." And I say, "Yeah." And he comes down the ladder and he shakes my hand, he said, "Hey man, I just want to thank you for doing the show you're doing, because every Tuesday night I watch it with my family and my kids, and when I see you doing these things on the show, I can say to my kids, see, there's dignity in every job, and just because you're out of sight and out of mind doesn't mean you're not doing important work." And I literally tear up, and it makes me feel great, and I thank him. Now, 20 feet later, another guy recognizes me, Wall Street, Brooks Brothers suit, taking big steps, sees me, goes, "Mike Rowe." I say, "Hey, how are you?" We shake hands. He goes, "I'm great. I just want to say, I love your show. I watch it every week with my wife and my kids, and we laugh, and it's great. Because, you know, after each segment, I can turn to my kids and say, see what happens if you don't go to college?" And I'm like, no, you missed it. That's not the point of the show, right? But I couldn't, because, and I know you've learned this at some point in your trajectory, and many of you as well in relative terms, but you don't get to decide where the ball goes after you let it go, right? You just don't get to decide. What you do is you make the best pitch you can, and at least if you're in the entertainment business, if you're in the influencing business, if you're in the persuasion business, if you're in the sales business, you have to throw it as best you can and then see what happens. And so I realized in that moment I was really blessed and lucky to have a show that people liked. But I didn't get to decide why you liked it. Yeah. Right? And so today, we've done over 350 different dirty jobs. It's a mosaic. They're welders, they're skull cleaners, they're opal miners, just every imaginable job. And when people watch it, they all get something different from it. And this is the thing that I find chronically humbling. It's a constant reminder. I don't know how many times I'm going to keep realizing or learning this same lesson, but it's a big one. You can control a whole bunch of stuff in this category, and then there's everything else. So, we're going to do our best today. You're going to do your best this weekend, and you're going to say some things that are going to resonate with him, but not with her, or her, but not with them. Everybody's going to take a little something different from it, right? It's it's humbling but powerful to know that we're just not in total control of all of it.
You know, there was a guy up here that yesterday, I believe it was, and he was talking about if you have a vision, but then you put someone else's glasses on, they don't have the same vision as you, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of people here that are blue-collar folks, you know, construction workers, electricians, plumbers. Like, make some noise if you're in the trades here. You know, these are the backbone of America. You know, these are those people, and there's a lot of millionaires in the audience too that didn't go to college, that learn the value of hard work. I think now in our society, so many people are trying to find ways out of hard work that you'll get paid big money for hard work, and a lot of people are missing that.
Dude, can I tell you, this is the thing that continually shocks and surprises people more than anything else. And again, this show has been on the air 20 years. It's been on every single week, multiple times for 20 years, and it's been on in 170 countries for 20 years. Now, I'm not looking for thanks, but in spite of all of it, in spite of this incredible run and the amount of time I've put in with the foundation talking about the show, the thing that shocks people more and consistently is when I tell them that of the people we featured on Dirty Jobs, no less than 40 were multimillionaires. They can't believe it. And they can't believe it because we're grown up to expect a certain visual of success. We're told this is what success looks like, right? And these are very powerful, right? These are very powerful metaphors and very powerful visuals. When you see a guy crawl out of a septic tank covered in other people's shit, you just don't immediately go, millionaire, you know?
It's true.
You don't do it.
It's true.
And so when you put those examples on TV, I didn't make a big deal of it in Dirty Jobs because that show wasn't about the money, it was about the work. But years later, when I stepped back from it and started running a foundation, also dedicated to my pop, by the way, the foundation started to take shape, and we said, like, well, what do we want to do? What do we want to try and correct? It comes back to those stigmas and stereotypes about work. Because, never mind the TV show, if I ask all you guys right now to, like, close your eyes and imagine a plumber, most of you are going to see a 300-pound dude with a giant butt crack bending over to turn some wrench. You can't help it, right? That's
the image that's been planted.
That's right. Those images are powerful, and they're in our control. And part of the way, I think, to maybe turn the ship around a little bit, get that student debt number down, get those open positions down, and get more people hooked up with a job and a set of skills that reflect the thing they were born to do, right? We have to challenge that image of the plumber you see in your mind. My foundation has trained 1,800 people at this point. We award work ethic scholarships. We don't award scholarships for four-year schools. We award scholarships for trade schools. And I'm telling you, man, the stories that are coming back now, I've been telling anecdotal stories for years and encouraging people to pursue these things. But now, and I bet you've seen this in your organization too, what's more powerful? You telling your story about how you did it and what you think and how you feel and why, or bringing somebody out of the audience who did what you said and shares their story?
100% them.
That's it. So this is something I knew but didn't fully appreciate until I saw it. So I just spent a weekend with some of our scholarship recipients who 5 years ago got a very modest work ethic scholarship from my foundation. $5,000 to weld, $7,000 for a plumbing certification. You sit down with these people and you talk to them now and you hear about their balanced life, you hear about their $150,000 a year, you hear about them having time to coach their kids' softball team, you hear about the dignity of basically going to work, like with a cape on your back. The toilet doesn't flush and Frank shows up and now everything's better. There's joy, there's pride, And it's like there's so much of it there that so many in our country can't see. So, look, it's been a real privilege for me to do a show like Dirty Jobs and to have a foundation like the one I have, simply because now I can sit back and say, tell me your story. And the stories are good.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is awesome. So switching it up a little bit, the writers are on strike, Hollywood's going through some weird stuff, and the reality TV is still the new heat wave of everything, and there's actually a lot of people in the trades that are in the audience and stuff that they're wanting to profile their lives, and they're shooting YouTube shows or they're getting paid podcasts and stuff like that. What are some advice you can maybe give somebody that's trying to get media attention, that's trying to grow? Because obviously you've mastered that and dominated TV for 20 plus years, so what are some advice you can maybe give somebody that's looking to blow up?
So, okay, I'm probably not the best guy in the room. I mean, I appreciate the compliment, but here's what happened to me. I got very fortunate because there was a writer's strike back in 2000, actually. And when I started pitching Dirty Jobs, believe me, that was a hard sell. It was a talk show in a sewer, basically, right? It wasn't funny enough for Comedy Central. It was too funny for PBS. It wasn't gross enough for Fox. It was too gross for ABC. Everybody said no for their own reason. I snuck into Discovery, but there was no such thing as reality TV at the time. There was Survivor, which is a competition show, and there was Jesse James building motorcycles in his garage. Remember, right? So that was it. So I basically come in with my pitch, which is, hey, I'm not an expert. I don't want to be a host anymore. I just want to be a guest who works as an apprentice. That never would have worked 3 months earlier or 3 months later. I just happened to be there at just the right time. I say this because I don't know that I fully understand the times that we're in right now. Because I was so busy carving out my chunk in broadcast and cable that I wasn't really paying attention to what was happening right in front of me on YouTube and Facebook. And I know that a lot of you, in fact, I'd love to pick your brain when we're done a little bit, because I've just decided, literally this week, that I'm pivoting and really focusing on digital for the first time, right? Because it's not that I've neglected it or ignored it, it's just that I was busy doing it in a weirdly conventional way. But you're right, the writers, the actors, and the directors could very likely all sit down at the same time. And I wish them well. I don't get involved in labor disputes by and large, but there's a big conversation to be had about how to whack up what's left in the world of residuals. But in that moment, content's going to dry up. And if you have a story to tell, and if you're willing to take the reverse commute, I would say that the opportunities have never been better. Quick sidebar, if I can drag my mom back into this again. So my mother is a 3-time New York Times best-selling author. Her first book was published and went to number 4 on the list when she was 80 years old.
Wow.
My mom, I can't believe I'm talking about my mother like this, but when I reflect on it, there's no better example I can think of, including everybody that we've featured on Dirty Jobs, of real persistence. My mom wrote every day for 60 years, for as long as I've known her. My mom tells the story, and this is super weird, but she was nursing me. I was like 3 months old, and she was writing one of her stories, and she literally forgot I'm hanging there on her boob. I'm swelling up like a tick, right? I nearly drowned in breast milk. So my mother's so crazy with the writing. And she would write these stories. She'd write stories about people she met during the day. A cop on horseback, she'd interview him, she'd write a story, she'd stick it on the refrigerator with a magnet. My dad would take the story down the next day and read it to me and my brothers. And then he'd read it to people at church. And then he'd read it to people after church at the Bob's Big Boy. Hey, have you heard the latest from Peggy Rowe? And he'd sit down and read him a story. This is my mother. Every day for 60 years, she writes stories no one reads except my dad. And I was the audience for that. And then one day she's 78 years old. I swear this is an answer to your question. And she calls me and she leaves a couple messages. And I'm busy shooting dirty jobs. I don't get back to her. So she's pissed off because she wants to tell me a story. So she writes the story to me instead. And the story is she loses her big blue purse at the local Walmart. And she and my dad go on this incredible journey. The purse is recovered, but the craziness that happens with the Walmart people is laugh out loud funny. I'm home for a couple hours. I get her email. I read the story. I take my phone, I set it up, and I read it word for word. And I post it on my Facebook page where there's 6 million people, all right? And then I go crawling through sewers and I'm back doing dirty jobs. I come home 3 days later. My mom's story has been viewed 72 million times. Wow. Okay? Now, back to your first question. Was this part of your plan? No, dude, it's not part of the plan. It's not part of the plan. But suddenly 70 million people are into my mom's writing. And a publisher calls and says, hey, Mike, your mom, she's got a gift here. If she's willing to write like a couple dozen other stories like that, but put you in them so we have a hook, we can do a book. So I said, hey, Mom, unbelievable. You've been writing now for nearly 60 years. I think I got you a book deal. She goes, oh, that's terrific, Michael. What do I have to do? I'm like, well, you just have to write a couple dozen stories and put me in them, right, so the publisher has a hook. And she says, well, Michael, I have 2 other sons. Are they famous, Mom? She's like, okay, I'll think about it. She goes away, and she comes back like 3 months later with a book filled with terrific stories. I'm not in any of them, okay? The book is called About My Mother. It's about my grandmother. And the publisher won't touch it. They're like, I'm sorry, there's no hook here. So I say to my partner, Mary, who's back in your green room now, probably getting an IV, I say, hey, can we do something about this? She's like, of course we can. Why don't we just print 10,000 copies? So we print 10,000 copies of my mom's book. I put them on my Facebook page. They sell out in 3 days. Publisher calls back. He's like, Jesus, you didn't tell us she could write. I'm like, well, of course she can write. So they reprint my mom's first book. She gets a 3-book deal. They're all bestsellers. Now, the moral of the story is, I don't know what to tell you guys what to do when the writers strike and the actors strike. I think what you need to do is throw more mud on the wall and see what sticks. Keep your people close. Share your dreams and hopes with the people that you trust. Put it out there. I'm not saying just cross your fingers and hope. There are a lot of affirmative things you can do along the way. But don't discount the people who are closest to you. Share it. Write it down. Make a video. Post it. Maybe it goes viral, maybe it doesn't. Have a good time doing it. Take the reverse commute in the process. And always listen to your mother.
That's a good lesson for you guys. I've been lately talking about this gentleman named Jelly Roll, who's a country music star now, rapper turned country music star. And it's the most inspiring story out there right now because he's been making music for 15 years that nobody listened to. And then he writes this one song. It took that one song to go viral, and people are like, oh shit, you've got 15 years of music here, 23 albums. And now he's the biggest celebrity right now in the music deal. Everybody knows the face, the brand. They're doing documentaries about him. Had he given up at any moment, they're not listening to my music. He never made that. Had your mother stopped writing, they're not reading it. It's amazing how when you just don't give up, that's the ultimate superpower on this planet, is just refusing to quit. Because you know why? Everybody else quits along the way. So if you're the one that doesn't quit, then you're the one that's destined to win in the end, you know?
Dude, I know his story, and it's great. And it does remind me of my mom in that way. My mom dreamed of being a New York Times best-selling author. But I'll tell you the truth, after 35 years of rejection, she gave up on the dream, but she didn't give up on the work.
Oh, man, that's powerful.
She gave up on the dream, but not the work. And she didn't let the abdication of the dream rob her of the joy that came from filling up those yellow legal pads and sticking them on the refrigerator so my old man could pick them up like the town crier and walk around town. She didn't let anybody take the joy out of the work. Now, maybe you've shared this story with groups like this. If you haven't, does the name Kurt Richter ring any bells?
No, sir.
Kurt Richter was a behavioral psychologist for Hopkins back in the late 50s. And he conducted a fairly famous experiment that's kind of disturbing, but I think really interesting to the jelly roll point. Kurt Richter took buckets of water and rats, and he put rats in the buckets of water, and he watched them swim. He was curious to see how long the average rat would swim after learning that there was no way out of the enclosure. Domestic rats paddled around for a few minutes and then dove to the bottom to explore to see if there was any way out. And then they came back to the surface, and in about 3 minutes, they drowned. Wild rats, hungrier rats, aggressive rats, they went in and they paddled hard and fast, round and round they went. None of them lived beyond 15 minutes. They all drowned between 14 and 15 minutes, hundreds of them. Barbaric, right? Maybe a little disturbing. But then the experiment starts. Kurt Richter takes another group of wild rats and puts them into the same buckets and watches them swim. But now, instead of waiting for them to drown at 15 minutes, he reaches in at 14 and a half minutes and he pulls them out. And he sets them down, and he takes a towel, and he wipes them off, and he gives them some food, and he lets them catch their breath. Then he puts them back in the bucket. Question: how long does the rat who's put back in the bucket swim?
30 minutes.
30 minutes? Longer. Longer than 6 hours. That's a good guess, though. Correct. 60 hours.
That guy has Google.
He must have Google. 60 hours. Have you heard the story yet? Oh, on my podcast. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, yeah. Well, all right, you cheated. But yeah, 60 hours, dude. I mean, look, people aren't rats. I'm not saying we're all just rats flopping around in a bucket of water, except maybe we are a little, kinda. What happens to a rat who loses hope? How long does it take for a rat's brain to realize, all right, I'm strong and I could probably keep swimming, but what's the point? The sides are slippery. There's no way out through the bottom. I'm just paddling around here like an asshole. What am I doing? I'm just gonna drown. But the rats who are saved and given a second chance, 15 minutes to 60 hours. And this isn't one rat. These are dozens and dozens, hundreds of them. So the experiment is real. There's real science to it. And I'm not a behavioral psychologist, so I don't know how much to assume is true for our species. But I know for myself how I feel when I believe there's hope. I know from my mom how I feel when I understand the difference between giving up on a dream and giving up on the work. I understand those things. I remember coming back from New York City one Thanksgiving. I got caught in the Macy's Day Thanksgiving Day Parade. Dude, talk about the seventh level of hell. This is nothing I'd rather be a rat in a bucket of water, because I sat there on 10th Avenue trying to get to Lincoln Tunnel, and we didn't move for 4.5 hours. 4.5 hours. Now, if you know you're going to be stuck for 4.5 hours, you can do things in your mind. You can prepare yourself. You can do some breathing exercises, make some phone calls, get a hoagie. You can do any number of things. But if you don't know how it ends, and you get an hour and a half, 2 hours into that thing, brother, that's enough time to go through the 5 stages of grief multiple times. You start to lose your mind, and you start to really and truly believe that you could die here in the Lincoln Tunnel. We're never going to move again. Rational people lose their minds, right? So, yeah, on the one hand, I want to mirror what you said, because I think it's great advice to be persistent and to not quit. But I got to throw one thing at you, because I'd like your thoughts on this too. Staying the course only makes sense if you're going in the right direction. So what do you say to somebody who you want to encourage, who's had some failure, who is ready to give up? Does that person need to hear the story about the rat? Do you need to hear the story about my mom, who for 60 years stuck with it? Or do you need somebody to take you by the scruff of the neck, like my granddad did, and say, hey, you can be a tradesman, just get a different toolbox. Learn an aria. Get in the opera. Do something you don't care about. You might be good at it. It's so hard to know exactly what to say to whom and when. But in general, there's a lot more virtue in persistence. There's a lot more character in resiliency. Quitting's easy. Always has been. That's why so many people are so good at it.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. Okay, so I invited you up here because I think, I like the show Dirty Jobs. A side note, I meant to say this earlier. The episode where you helped the guys build the roads, and they're building roads everywhere here, as you probably saw on your way in. It really did give us, my wife and I, a newfound respect for what those guys are doing out there to make it easy for us to not get stuck somewhere like the Lincoln Tunnel for 4 hours, it's a good reminder of, hey, we're thankful that this exists versus, them not having it at all. So, but I didn't invite you here because of your TV fame. I invited you here because I think you are the greatest living storyteller out there. And I consider myself a storyteller. That's how I've built this whole brand and have all these people here. And I literally think that you're the greatest alive at telling stories. Do you have a formula or a process, or is it just a natural gift? Sounds like your mom was obviously a storyteller too, so it's a gene of some sort that was passed down. You missed the handyman, but you got the storyteller, so...
Well, thanks, man. That's some very, very high cotton. I really never thought of myself that way. I had a big breakthrough in the sewer when I realized that I didn't have to be a host. I could be an apprentice. I could be an avatar, right? Like a cipher. That was a really powerful. Like the way we think of ourselves matters, the way we identify ourselves, the thing you put on your business card, right? I mean, it's not just a title, but if you think of yourself as a host versus a guest, you're going to behave differently. And so when I started, it was actually on Facebook. I did everything wrong. Everybody told me that, write 100 words, post a picture, maybe a cat video, maybe a recipe. It's not a place for thoughtful discourse. My first post on Facebook was 3,000 words. And I've written longer ones, I've written shorter ones, But I didn't do it to attract 6 million people. I did it because it amused me. Like who's your favorite comic?
Dave Chappelle.
Okay, I love Dave Chappelle.
Me too.
When I watch Dave Chappelle, I've seen him live twice. I never once thought he was trying to make me laugh. I thought he was trying to make himself laugh. Right? Like when I see a great singer on stage, I haven't seen Jelly Roll do a lot of stuff, but I know who he is, and I can picture him in my mind's eye. I don't think he's trying to entertain me. I think he's trying to entertain himself. Great writers, great singers, great painters, right? First and foremost, I get the sense that they've got a higher benchmark than you, right? I mean, with respect, the audience is very, very, very important. But the most important thing is whatever integrity you can bring to whatever your art happens to be. So if I'm going to tell a story, the first thing that I think of is, what are the honest parts? Because the whole thing isn't going to be honest. There's no such thing as a completely honest story. But what are the honest parts? What's the part that matters? You know, is it 60 hours or is it 62? Or is it 58? How long did the rat really live in the bucket? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. For days, for sure. But sometimes I think we're living in a world where people are so hung up on the very, very super specific details of every single thing that they lose sight of the forest for the trees. If you want to tell a good story, you have to identify the parts that are true, and then you have to lean into the details. You can't ignore the details. You can't gloss over them. But you have to take a minute. You have to let it sit there for a while. And you have to juxtapose things. This is another totally accidental thing that happened to me. But back in 2008, I was invited to this conference. It was called TED. You guys have heard of TED Talks, I'm sure, right? Well, back in 2008, I hadn't. I didn't know what it was. And the Discovery Channel was sponsoring one. And they asked me to go and say a few words to basically introduce myself, dirty jobs, maybe thank Discovery. I just didn't know what to expect. Well, I went, and as it turns out, I was a featured speaker. I didn't know. I walked into the thing, and my picture is on something like about that size. It's hanging down from the thing, and I got my arm inside a cow. I'm doing some dirty job. It's crazy, and it's like lessons from the dirt. Mike Rowe's going to talk about lessons from the dirt. I'm like, holy crap. So I had a couple hours to think it through, and I wanted to tell them a story. You know, I wanted to tell them a story that juxtaposed some big ideas, and I wanted to tell them a story that ended in a very specific way, because that's important too, right? You got to know how you want to land the plane before you take off. But there's a lot of stuff that can happen along the flight, right? That's neither here nor there. So long story short, I told a story about experts and about my fear of blindly believing in the expert orthodoxy. Because I had learned that a lot on dirty jobs. There's a big fat file on my former boss's desk with angry letters from the EPA, from the Humane Society, from PETA, from all the angry acronyms. Oh, they're so angry, dude. They look at dirty jobs like, that's not the way you do that. Put your helmet on. Oh, you lazy bastard. That's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. It's an army of correctors out there. So I told a story about the time I was invited to Craig, Colorado, to castrate lambs. And it's a great dirty job, but I wanted to get it right, so I called the Humane Society and PETA before we went. And I said, look, we're going to be castrating lambs on the show. I don't want to piss you guys off, so what's the proper method? And these guys tell me, well, the proper method is to take a rubber band, a thick rubber band, and you put it around the scrotum of the baby lamb, right? And that slows the flow of blood, And over a period of a couple days, eventually the testicles will fall off of the creature. And that's how you do it. I'm like, my God, that sounds hellish, but let's give it sounds like good TV too, right? So I go to Craig, Colorado to castrate these lambs, and Albert Villard's the lamb rancher. He picks up the lamb and he puts it on the little fence post, and his wife, Melanie, pulls the legs apart, and Albert reaches into his pocket to hand me one of the rubber bands to put it around the scrotum, except he doesn't pull out a rubber band, he pulls out a pocket knife. It's like a switchblade. He opens it up, and I can see the sun coming over the Colorado Rockies, glinting off the blade. I'm like, what in the hell is this? And before I can figure out what's happening, I'm holding an orange bucket, by the way. His wife's got the lamb's legs pulled apart. And Albert leans in, cuts off the tip of the scrotum, pushes it back, and reveals 2 testicles about the size of my thumb. Now, my cameramen are around me. They're like, what in the hell is happening here? Like, we're right on the verge of some German porno, right? I don't even know what I'm looking at. And before my brain can process any of this, Albert, he's still got this big bushy handlebar mustache, I remember. He leans down and he takes the testicles in his teeth. He bites them, and then he snaps his head back. And then he spits 2 testicles into the orange bucket I'm holding. And they go,
That's a dirty job.
dude, I can't even believe what's happening. So I did something I never ever do on dirty jobs, right? I say, cut. It's funny. But I said, look, man, this isn't that kind of show, okay? We're not the kind of reality show. It's like, you can't be biting the balls off a baby lamb, dude. This show's in 172 countries. People actually watch this. That is some seriously jacked up stuff right there. There's no need for it. He's like, well, that's the way we do it. I'm like, no. I called the experts. You got to put the rubber band. You got to put the rubber band on the sheep. That's the way you do it. And he's like, well, I mean, we got those. We could do that, but it's not very nice to the lamb. I'm like, not very nice to the lamb. You just bit its balls off, dude. What are you talking about? So he's like, well, look, if that's the way you want to do it. I'm like, yes, that's the way I want to do it, because I want the show to be on the air, right? My mom watches this thing. I don't need her seeing me biting the balls off a baby lamb, for Christ's sake. So Melanie picks up another one of the little lambs. We got like 30 of them in this holding pen. And I spread the legs, and Albert steps in, and he's got this, it's like a shears, except weird attachment to it. He puts the rubber band on it, so you squeeze it and the rubber band opens, and you put the rubber band around the scrotum, right? And we put the lamb on the ground, and this lamb is in obvious distress. It's trembling, right? And it's just like, oh, and it just kind of walks over and just lies down in the corner. And now this is all on camera. We're filming this, and I'm like, ugh, I hate this. I'm like, how long is he going to be like that? He's like, 2 days. 2 days? That's a long time. Meanwhile, like 2 minutes in real time have gone by. The lamb that just got its nuts bit off. He'd already forgotten about it. He doesn't care. He doesn't even miss them. Doesn't even remember he had them. They're gone, right? In that moment, Ryan, I realized, God damn it, the experts were wrong. They told me at PETA and the Humane Society, this is the way to do it. This is what sheep docking is. You take their tails, you take their testicles. This is the approved way to do it. And they were wrong. It was approved because it looked nice. It was approved because in their minds, the idea of taking a scrotum and cutting it open and biting the testicles out is insane. But guess what? Going back generations and generations, you're not out there with a team of 3 people. You're out there either by yourself or with one helper. And it's not nearly as unhygienic as you think. In fact, it's the cleanest part of the body. It's never even been exposed to air before. There are 1,000 good reasons to castrate lambs orally. It's just a tough sell in prime time. It's just hard to look at. But we did it. And that show aired to enormous ratings, and we got lots of pushback and lots of problems. But to answer your question, when I walk into a TED Talk and realize I got to tell a story, I need to know how it ends. And it ends with me talking about a peripeteia, which is the Greek word for a discovery, right? The Aristotelian definition of a tragedy is that moment in the course of the story when the protagonist realizes that everything he thought he knew about a thing is wrong. It's that moment of realization. We've all had them. Everybody in this room has had a peripeteia, right? And if you look for any great story, Ryan, you'll find it, right? The Sixth Sense, spoiler alert, but we've all seen the movie, right? Bruce Willis starts out helping he's a clinical psychologist, and this little kid sees dead people. The kid's clearly nuts, but as the movie progresses, Bruce starts to like the kid. And then he starts to think, maybe this kid's not crazy. And then he realizes, absolutely, this kid is not crazy. Because Bruce Willis, of course, is dead. Bruce Willis has his peripeteia. When you realize you've been dead the whole movie, right? Your life changes. So that's basically what happened to me hundreds of times over the course of Dirty Jobs. I realized the experts weren't always right. I realized you can learn all kinds of things from a sheep farmer who's fourth generation, who knows his business better than I can ever hope to. I realize that when your mom tells you to do something that looks like work, you should take her advice. And I realize when that same woman writes every day for 60 years, for God's sakes, there's a lesson in there. And to your point, I realize if I'm going to tell a story, lean into the details, figure out the true parts, and know how to land the plane.
And that's a prime example of that story right there. Bit the sheep's testicles with his mouth. It's interesting.
Didn't know we were going to go there, but hey.
I don't think that would work with cattle.
With cattle?
Yeah.
You're going to need a big mouth.
You're going to need a big mouth, yeah. All right, to wind this thing down, let's talk about your sweat pledge a little bit. You believe that Americans are entitled to 3 things: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and nothing else. Why the sweat pledge, and what's your thought process about that movement?
Well, the sweat pledge is a mandatory document that I wrote 10 years ago after some wine that every work ethic scholarship applicant needs to sign. We award work ethic scholarships at my foundation. We're not huge, but we've done about $7 million in the last 8 years. And again, these are for skilled trades, right? But look, guys, how do you quantify that? You know, how do you look into somebody's soul and go, she's got work ethic. He's got, it's impossible. But one of the things we do is ask people to sign this simple sweat pledge. Sweat stands for skills and work ethic aren't taboo, because I'm terribly clever. And one of the tenets in the pledge is what you just said. But you framed it in an interesting way. You said, the only things we're entitled to are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What I mean to say is, can you believe we're entitled to those 3 things? I mean, oh my God, how much more could you want? First of all, life. You've already hit the greatest lottery of all time. You're alive.
You would trade every dollar they have to stay alive too.
No, it's bonus time. We're already in bonus time. The odds of you being born are so infinitesimally small. The odds of this exact configuration of human beings sitting here in this assemblage right now is statistically impossible. So we've done it. You already won. You hit the lottery. You're walking around with the winning ticket. It's in your pocket right now. You live in the greatest country on the planet, in my humble opinion. And
In your correct opinion.
and so look, I know we've heard it, and I know it sounds like pabulum and tripe and bromides and platitudes, but if you're fundamentally grateful for that, you can only have so rotten a day, right? And so there's real truth in that. So the first thing on my sweat pledge is I want people who agree with that. I want people who feel lucky to be bipedal, walking around, fogging a mirror. If you don't feel lucky for that, then you're going to be hard to help. Liberty. I mean, you know, you can't appreciate it unless you're curious, and you can't be curious about history and not be impressed by the fact that liberty is a very, 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 very rare thing. And of course, the pursuit of happiness is very different than happiness, right? Yeah. And so, back to my mom, she wasn't guaranteed to become a 3-time New York Times best-selling author. She's 85 years old now. She's almost done her 4th book. That wasn't the guarantee. The guarantee was if you want to write every day for 60 years, you can do it. Me? I didn't know Dirty Jobs was going to win Emmy Awards. I didn't know it was going to launch 36 other shows. I didn't know it was going to bring me to you. Didn't matter. None of that was guaranteed. What was guaranteed was the right to crawl through the sewer, was the right to castrate a lamb with my teeth, should I so choose, right? Or not. All those decisions 1,000 times over. That's the pursuit. The fact that we're guaranteed a chance to be ridiculous, to fail, to dream. That's all we're guaranteed. That's, my God, what more could you possibly want? It's only everything. It's only everything. So, yeah, my sweat pledge is full of things like that, designed to stimulate conversations around things that, look, and I know I just sound like the angry old dude on the porch screaming at the kids to get off his lawn, but personal responsibility still matters. Delayed gratification matters. Gratitude matters. A decent attitude matters. Showing up early, staying late, taking a bite of the shit sandwich when it's your turn, volunteering for every crappy task there is. We live in a very strange time right now, but there's never been a better opportunity for people to distinguish themselves by simply doing the hard thing, the dirty thing, the different thing. Take the reverse commute. See what happens. Write your story. Stick it on a refrigerator. See who pulls it down and reads it. You might be surprised.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming here. To return the favor for you speaking, I'd like to, at some point in the next couple months, run a fundraiser for your foundation to help you out. We have a lot of people with money here.
Amazing.
I'd love to get back to that. I would love to.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm the kind of guy that takes that sort of thing seriously. So, terrific. As for the rest of you, I don't want to turn you into evangelicals or disciples, but take this for what it's worth. We give away $1 million every 6 months in work ethic scholarships. We're doing it right now for the last tranche, and we'll do it again at the end of summer. If any of you have a loved one or a friend, somebody in your family who isn't college material, who has been told that that's not going to work out for them or whatever, the opportunities in the skilled trades are real. Most people simply don't understand it. Steam fitting, pipe fitting, HVAC, electric, plumbing, whatever you think you know about it is probably wrong. There's a path to a 6-figure income. There's an entrepreneurial path that reaps huge dividends. And there's the employer path that offers a truly balanced life. The opportunities are real. My foundation is going to be there. Feel free to pass the word. We'd love to help if we can.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you.